small piece of cardboard, over a century old. Today, it's worth millions. On it is the face of a man who once defined the very soul of baseball, Honus Wagner. Baseball has had its gods, Ruth, Cobb, Johnson, but none embodied the game's essence quite like Wagner. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the flashiest, but he was the complete ball player of his time, a shortstop who could hit, run, field, and lead with an elegance that seemed almost supernatural. They called him the Flying Dutchman, and for good reason. His speed and instincts could change the course of a game in an instant. Yet perhaps Wagner's most famous image doesn't come from the diamond at all, but from that very card, withdrawn from circulation over 100 years ago, and now the most valuable in history. Why? Because of Wagner. Because of what he stood for. So how did a coal miner's son from Pennsylvania become both the symbol of baseball excellence and the centerpiece of the most coveted card in the world? And why, more than a century later, does his name still carry a kind of magic that money can't quite buy? He was born Johannes Peter Wagner in 1874 in the rugged hills of western Pennsylvania. The son of German immigrants, he grew up in a household that knew more about hard labor than about leisure. His father worked in the coal mines, and by the time Honus was old enough to hold a shovel, he too was expected to help. The mines were dark, suffocating, and unforgiving, but they built in him a strength that no training regimen could ever match. In the small town of Carnegie, where dust clung to every surface and children learned responsibility early, young Wagner found his escape on makeshift ball fields. He and his brothers would play from sunup to sundown using broomsticks and rubber balls, their laughter carrying over the smoke of the steel mills. Baseball wasn't a dream of fame back then. It was a moment of joy stolen from the grind of survival. Neighbors recalled how awkward Wagner looked, with his bowed legs and stocky build. He didn't fit the mold of the graceful athlete. But when the ball was in play, his body moved with surprising quickness. His hands were strong and sure, honed from years of manual labor. He could scoop up a grounder like a craftsman, fitting a tool into place. More than anything, he loved the game because it gave him freedom, something the mines never could. From those humble beginnings, a foundation was laid. The coal miner's son, covered in dust and sweat, was already carrying within him the instincts of one of baseball's greatest legends. The turning point came when Wagner's raw talent caught the eye of someone who mattered. His older brothers had already been dabbling in semi-professional ball, and Honus, though rough around the edges, was impossible to ignore. In 1895, a local baseball man named Edward Barrow, who would later become one of the most influential executives in the history of the game, watched Wagner play and was struck by the sheer force of his ability. His swing wasn't pretty, but the ball exploded off his bat. His fielding wasn't textbook, but he made every play. He was, as Barrow would later say, built to play baseball. That year, Wagner signed his first professional contract, earning barely more than a coal miner's wage, but it was the first step out of the mines forever. His journey took him through the minor leagues, where his unusual frame and unpolished style drew skepticism. Scouts doubted whether a stocky yet bow-legged infielder could ever thrive in the big leagues. But doubt didn't bother Wagner. He simply outplayed it. Game after game, his bat and glove forced people to believe. By 1897, he was discovered by Barney Dreyfuss, who saw in Wagner the cornerstone of a team that could dominate for years. When Wagner finally landed with the Pittsburgh Pirates, it wasn't just a signing. It was a moment that altered the course of baseball history. From a dusty coal town to the shining diamonds of the major leagues, the Flying Dutchman had arrived. On the diamond, Honus Wagner became a force of nature. From the moment he pulled on a Pittsburgh Pirates uniform in 1897, he redefined what it meant to be a shortstop. He wasn't just a fielder who stopped ground balls and turned double plays. He was a hitter, a base stealer, a leader. At a time when players usually specialized in one skill, Wagner seemed to master them all. His swing was compact and unorthodox, but pitchers dreaded it. Over a 21-year career, he collected more than 3,400 hits and won 8 National League batting titles, more than any player until Tony Gwynn came nearly a century later. He led the league in slugging percentage, RBIs, doubles, and stolen bases at various points, proving he was as dangerous with speed as he was with power. Fans in Pittsburgh adored him. When he took the field, children pressed against the fences, desperate to watch the Flying Dutchman at work. His legs, though bowed and heavy-looking, carried him like a sprinter. He stole nearly 700 bases in his career, often leaving catchers shaking their heads. Defensively, he seemed born to play shortstop. His strong hands and instincts turned him into a wall on the left side of the infield, and his quick release made would-be runners think twice. The defining moment came in 1909, when the Pirates faced Ty Cobb's Detroit Tigers in the World Series. Cobb, fiery and feared, was considered the greatest hitter alive. But Wagner outshone him. He batted .333 in the series, drove in key runs, and led Pittsburgh to a 7-game triumph, the first World Series title in franchise history. It was a symbolic passing of the torch, Wagner proving that the quiet craftsman could humble even the loudest star. By the time he retired in 1917, Wagner was a legend. His place in the inaugural Hall of Fame class in 1936, alongside Ruth, Cobb, Johnson, and Mathewson, cemented him as one of the game's immortals. In Pittsburgh, his name was spoken with reverence. Across baseball, he was recognized as the standard of all-around greatness. For all his dominance, Wagner's story wasn't without its shadows. Unlike Ruth, who became a national celebrity, or Cobb, whose fiery personality kept him in headlines, Wagner was quieter, almost reserved. Some sports writers of the time worried he would be forgotten, that his greatness might fade behind the brighter flames of louder men. He carried little interest in self-promotion, and in an era where the press loved controversy, Wagner gave them almost none. But perhaps the most intriguing conflict in his story came not on the field, but through a single decision. In 1909, the American Tobacco Company began producing baseball cards for distribution inside packs of cigarettes. Wagner's likeness was included, but almost immediately he demanded they stop. Some said it was because he disapproved of tobacco being marketed to children. Others whispered he simply wanted more money for the use of his image. Whatever the truth, production was halted after only a limited run. That choice, whether born of principle or pride, turned Wagner's card into the rarest of treasures. Over the years, the T206 Honus Wagner became known as the holy grail of baseball cards, with only a handful surviving. Each time one surfaced at auction, it shattered records, hundreds of thousands, then millions of dollars exchanged hands, all for a card that once slipped out of a cigarette pack. It was a strange twist for a man who had never sought the spotlight. On the field, he let his play speak. Off it, his legacy was sealed by a decision that unintentionally linked his name to wealth, rarity, and mystique. For Wagner, it was never about money. It was about what he stood for. Yet the world turned his quiet resistance into a myth that outlived him. Honus Wagner's legacy reaches far beyond the box scores. In Pittsburgh, he became a symbol of grit and loyalty, a man who gave his entire career to one city, one team, and defined an era when baseball was still carving its place in American life. Generations of Pirates fans grew up hearing his name spoken with reverence, and his statue outside PNC Park still greets them today, bat in hand, forever frozen in the stance that once made pitchers tremble. For the game itself, Wagner set the standard for what it meant to be complete. He wasn't just a hitter or a fielder or a base stealer. He was all of it. Coaches pointed to him as the template for young players who wanted to understand how to play the game the right way. His induction into the very first Hall of Class in 1936 wasn't just an honor. It was a declaration that his place among the immortals was secure. And then there is the card. That simple, century-old rectangle of cardboard ensured that Wagner's name would never fade. Long after his final game, long after his death in 1955, the T206 Wagner card continues to appear in headlines, each sale sparking fresh wonder about the man whose face it bears. It is more than memorabilia. It is a cultural icon, a reminder that greatness doesn't just live on the field, but in the stories and symbols we pass down. Wagner once said, "There ain't much to being a ball player, if you're a ball player." Simple words, yet they captured the heart of his philosophy. He didn't play for fame or fortune or to be remembered on a trading card worth millions. He played because the game was in his blood. And perhaps that is why, more than 100 years later, the name Honus Wagner still carries a weight that money cannot buy. A legend written in dirt, sweat, and the quiet dignity of a man who gave baseball everything he had.